Hello gentlemen and ladies. The hope was to keep doing a video on certain anniversary dates of the Battle of Britain, like September the 15th and so on and so forth, but I didn't have my laptop from around, from August 27th until about 4 or 5 days ago. Needless to say, for those who are watching, Battle of Britain, as the Allies cared for it, or the British cared for it, sort of ended really about September the 15th. Historically, the Battle of Britain ended by October 31st, but it depends what you look at, really. The Germans apparently considered that the Battle of Britain was merely a part of a campaign, that started when they invaded Norway and France in April-May 1940 respectively, and kept on until May 1941 when Hitler was focused on Russia, and so everything went east. As far as the British were concerned, it was the battle, and nowadays we don't celebrate our heroes as such, but as October dawned, the fighter command were effectively saved. If Hitler and indeed Goering had continued bombing London after, shall we say, September 7th, then who knows what might have happened. Instead, on August 25th, 26th, the Germans accidentally bombed London. Churchill was incensed, bombs Berlin, and Hitler bombs London from September the 7th. Hitler didn't seem to have any understanding of anything. I am not excusing the man, one of the most evil men, of course, of history. But, I've read books about the Tirpitz by Patrick Bishop, indeed a few Patrick Bishop books lately. And there's a few things that you look at and you think, well, if only Hitler had done things differently. One of the things is indeed if, Berlin had been bombed on, I think it was August 27th, you ignore it and you carry on going after the British. But as it is, come October 1940, the Luftwaffe have entered a fourth phase, and the phase includes bombing London to extinction and trying to negotiate some kind of peace settlement. All for nothing. As I say, by the 31st, what we know as the Battle of Britain is over. And the weather being what it is at that time of year in 1940, early 1941, we don't pay much attention to. There's the odd fighter sweep, there's some bomber raids, and certainly at night the Luftwaffe are bombing London and other cities. But otherwise, the Battle of Britain is over, really. It kind of ended around September the 15th. I mean, we remember now, and indeed technically every year since at least 1945, September the 15th as Battle of Britain Day, when the Luftwaffe went, it seems, all out to try and finish the British off. However, that was not the case, of course. Excuse me. Hitler's mind seemed to always be on Russia, and the who's and whys and the whats and hows are all known to history, but it seems that Stalin, right up until June 22nd, 1941, was very much believing that Hitler was his ally. I mean, there's stories that after June 22nd, Stalin disappeared to his Dachau, outside of Moscow, whatever. And then after that, Russia tried to stop Hitler, and of course it took until about 1943 for this to, take hold. Either way, Hitler's ambition was, of course, to invade Russia, Lebensraum. And as C.J. Sampson suggests in the aftermath of his book Dominion, it was all about food. It was all about resource and everything. Of all the countries in all the world to have engaged in warfare, Nazi Germany was probably the most hideously underprepared, and yet made a good go of it. I mean, Gross Admiral Eric Raeder, had an idea of Plan Z, and I think it was encouraged by the Nazi regime, in the 1930s, and the idea was by 1945, or at least 1948, there's be a handful of battleships, aircraft carriers, battle cruisers, destroyers and the like, and Hitler goes to war in 1939, and Raeder is not prepared. Take 1940, the invasion of Norway, for existence, which effectively ruined the German surface fleet by not even trying. Germany was hoping to take on Britain and anyone else, I suppose, with no aircraft carrier, because the Graf Zeppelin was a basket case, you only have to look at it. 2 battleships which, though commissioned, were not actually battle-worthy, so the Bismarck interprets. A handful of battle cruisers, the likes of the Deutschland, or what became the Lutzow, the Admiral Hipper, the Prinz Eugen, the Scharnhorst Gneisenau Eckau, and a handful of destroyers. Say Germany went to invade Britain in, September 1940, Germany had a dozen, 20 or so destroyers compared to the British 200 plus. The British had a dozen or more destroyers, it had a dozen or more battleships and battle cruisers. The German Navy simply was not geared towards anything. Doesn't matter? Historically it does, because Hitler's ambition was world domination. Or not, as the case might be. Hitler, as late as Dunkirk, if not the start of the Battle of Britain, was still hopeful that the British would come to their senses and declare a peace. If anyone but Churchill was in charge, that probably would have happened. You have to remember that in the 1920s and 30s, at least since the end of the First World War, crises were solved in this manner. But in 1940 it could have gone either way. I mean, if Halifax has become Prime Minister, say, in May 1940, history probably would have gone a certain way, and it didn't. Halifax, as soon as Churchill became Prime Minister, and as soon as Dunkirk was over, was kicked over to America as ambassador, get him out of the way. So who knows what might well have happened. The Battle of Britain, as we know it, starts winding down by the end of September, and it's all but over by the end of October. The British, though, despite the fact that September the 15th is marked as Battle of Britain Day, still suffer some egregious losses even by the end of September, start of October. The Germans by October are reduced to Sentinel for, if not fighter bombers, so your 109s, 110s, but also your Heinkel's, Dornier 17s, etc. The Luftwaffe plan has fallen apart. The Luftwaffe simply, at the start of war, September 1939, are not geared to fighting a proper war. You look at the British, I've read Bomber Boys by Patrick Bishop lately, and the Americans who bombed by day and the British by night. The British had, by 1943, had aircraft like the Lancaster, the Halifax, the Wellington, and the Lancaster was a 4-engined bomber. The Americans had the B-17, the B-24 and so on, whereas the Germans had no more than the Heinkel 111, the Dornier 17, the Junkers 88. The Germans did not have a strategic bomber, and yet tried to bomb Britain to submission in the summer and autumn of 1940. There was a chap whose name escapes me at this present who wanted to do a full-range bomber. He died, I think, 1936-37, and was overlooked because he died in a plane crash. It is debatable, of course, whether had he lived, would the Luftwaffe have gone ahead with a full-range bomber. Certainly, if they had been prepared for war, the Luftwaffe could have changed the Battle of Britain. A full-range bomber could have bombed the airfields in London and the like from a great height, or a certain height, without being engaged by British escort fighters. As it was, the Heinkel et al. Tried attacking Britain, were being slaughtered, and so the Luftwaffe switched to night bombing. As Patrick Bishop's book says, by 1944, the British and the Americans are able to bomb in daylight with relative freedom, and as is well documented, when D-Day happened, June 6, 1944, the invasion forces were harassed by at least no more than 2 fighter aircraft. The Luftwaffe as we know it ceased to exist as a practical fighting force before D-Day even happened. The last gasp of the Luftwaffe was probably January 1st, 1945, when, as part of the Ardennes offensive, the Luftwaffe went all out to try and destroy a bunch of aircraft on the ground, and they destroyed a few aircraft, American and British, but only because the weather changed. It's incredible, if you know your history, how things change. The Luftwaffe were, quite frankly, imperious, indestructible, from September the 1st, 1939, all the way through to September 1940. The idea of the Nazi Luftwaffe was that they helped the ground forces achieve blitzkrieg. So, Poland aside, you look at France, May 10th, Germany invades France. And the whole idea is that the Luftwaffe pounds away, and then, of course, the ground forces. Come the end of May 1940, Goering and saying to Hitler, my Luftwaffe can destroy the British Expeditionary Force on the ground. And as my history teacher taught me about 20 years ago almost, the sand only does so much. The bombs go in and explode, but without the effect, because the sand deafens it and all the rest of it. So come September the 30th, technically, the Royal Air Force have won the Battle of Britain, but it carries on to the end of October and it kind of peters out. The end, obviously, with the Battle of Britain is that if you're going to portray it, in film, you have to take poetic licenses. So in the Battle of Britain movie in 1969, you get that brilliant sequence on September the 15th with William Walton's Battle in the Air. And after it ends, you see the next scene, a bunch of chaps just sat around waiting for action, and they're just sort of twiddling their thumbs and all the rest of it. It wasn't like that. As I say, till the end of October, the Luftwaffe was still sending over fighters and bombers to bomb London, Portsmouth, Manchester, wherever you, but also to harass Fighter Command. The thing is with Fighter Command is that in the new year, they did things called rhubarbs and circuses. So somebody's bright idea was, because Dowding and Park were removed at the end of the Battle of Britain, that Spitfires and Hurricanes are laden up with bombs, or a bomb, because obviously a Spitfire and Hurricane can't take much more than a bomb, and go over and attack northern France. And the situation was reversed. Because, as I said before, when they've attacked southern England, the Luftwaffe, if they bail out, are taken prisoner in England. If they've made it back to France, fair play. Whereas it's switched. The RAF, Fighter Command, are attacking France. They get shot down over France, are taken prisoner. They have to get back to southern England. And the channel at its shortest point is about 20 odd miles. RAF pilots were not mad on it. A fair few were lost who had survived the battle. They were shot down over France or what have you. And it was during one of these sweeps that Douglas Bader was taken prisoner. And I was going to say shot down, but in the film Reach for the Sky, the suggestion is that he's shot down by one unknown, but historically it's suggested now that it was a friendly fire incident. Another Hurricane Spitfire came in, clipped him, he lost his tail fin, he had to bail out, and he was taken prisoner in 1941 and stayed a prisoner to VE Day. So that is the end of the Battle of Britain. And all the rest of it. Complaints on the postcard. Number 10 down the street, care of Mr. Boris Falafel Johnson. Thank you for watching, chaps. If you like the content, subscribe. If not, post a bitchy comment. Some people do. And all the rest of it. Up the Irish.